Hey, everybody. How's it going? What's up? It's Thursday. You know what that means. It's time for the VS Code live stream, the weekly live stream. This is, I think, our 60th straight week doing a live stream. Yeah, okay. We missed a couple in there, but you got to admit that's a lot. That's a lot. And someone who has been here for all of them. I know someone out here has been here for all of them. Who has it been, chat? Which one of you has joined us for every single VS Code live stream? What's up, Lucifer? Or no, sorry, Lucifer. I called you Lucifer. I'm so sorry. I'm good. How are you doing? Peter, what's up? How are you? Prakash, thank you for being here. By the way, we have an exciting stream today. This is actually a very exciting stream. We'll talk about it in just a second. We are going to do modernizing developer tools, and we've got a fellow from IBM here, Liam, and he is doing some incredible things. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, bro, I don't do COBOL. I don't do RPG. But the thing is, a lot of people still do. Or maybe you're thinking, oh, I do that. And I was kind of hoping not to talk about it. But the thing is, it's still out there. A lot of people are still doing it. It still drives a lot of the businesses and business processes that we have. And you can do some amazing things. Liam was showing me yesterday, and my mind was completely blown. COBOL and VS Code. Yeah, COBOL and VS Code. Well, Gustavo, there's nothing wrong with COBOL. COBOL is still a thing. You like to bank, right? You like banks? Me too. It's okay. COBOL's legit. All right. What's up, Dennis? Hello, Dennis. Hello from Germany. That's awesome. Before we do that, I found something that I wanted to show y'all that I thought was pretty cool. So let me share my screen here real quick. And y'all may know about this. I actually knew about this, but I'd forgotten about it. So this, StreamYard, you let me share. Okay. Do y'all know about this YouTube channel? This Code 2020? Do y'all know about this? This is just a bunch of VS Code tips and tricks. And they're all a minute or 2 minutes long, but there's so many of them. Look at this. It just goes on and on. And as best I can tell, this guy's been making a VS Code tip every day for years. There's so many of them. So that's Code 2020. Check that out and get your fill of VS Code if you haven't had enough of it after this live stream. But all right, enough of that. Stop sharing here. Well, let's bring Liam on. Liam, you've got fans already. Hi from Sweden. What's up, man? Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I kind of feel bad. My voice is not right today. Kind of not feeling my best, but
yeah, you've gone downhill since we chatted yesterday.
I know. I don't really know what happened. Well, actually, I do, but you don't want to know the story. So, but I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
We are excited that you're with us. I am. And I think for people here that don't do COBOL or RPG or some of these older systems, you're gonna get a history lesson here anyway, because there's a lot of history to these things in terms of how we used to build enterprise systems. And these systems, like I said, they are still around. They are still the backbone of much of what you interface with every day. Would you agree with that, Liam?
You couldn't have been any more true. And I mean, something you mentioned was that it used to be kind of the way that it was done, and honestly it still is. There are still tons of businesses investing into the systems that still run their business applications. It's still happening, and it probably won't be going away anytime soon, which is exactly why these tools exist.
So when we're talking about what we're talking about today, are we talking strictly about the IBM I, sort of formerly known as AS400? Are we talking about more than that? What are we talking about specifically here?
So the stuff that I'm going to be showing you today is specifically for IBM I, or as you put it, the AS400. There is also a different set of extensions for working with IBM Z, which is a sister operating system, and it's the mainframe. IBM Z is the mainframe, and IBM I is a mid-range platform, the AS400. So they are two different systems, but there are extensions for working in both of those environments inside of VS Code, but I maintain all of the IBM I ones. and there is a different team that maintains all of the IBM Z ones. Sorry.
So the AS400 or the IBM I, I'll get the naming right there. Sorry, I have years of AS400 in my history. Chat, listen,
That's
if you
okay.
worked in AS400, put a 1 in the chat, because I definitely did at some point in the past. But they didn't let me code on it, but I've seen it. So that's not considered a mainframe? You said that's a midframe? Did you call it a midframe?
A mid-range system. Yes,
okay.
It is not a mainframe, because so now today it runs on power hardware. So you can buy a power server. It runs on Power 9, Power 10 chips. And it's just an operating system that would run on its own VM, basically, on that system. So it's just IBM I is just really another operating system these days. You can run Linux alongside it, Windows alongside it. It's just another system that just fits right in these days. So
is that the name of the operating system that's running on those machines? Is IBM I? That's the name of the OS?
Yes, that's right. That's the name of the operating system. Yep.
And what is it, kind of like Windows, where you can code any language on it, where, if you have the right compiler, the correct runtimes?
That's a great question. So yeah, IBM I, it has something very unique called, the acronym is ILE, and I think it's Integrated Language Environment. I will confirm that. It's been so long since I've had to use that. Yeah, Integrated Language Environment. And basically what this is, it's kind of like, how .NET Core is like a bytecode before it touches the machine. Well, you can consider IBM I runs in this ILE environment, where you write in C, and you can write in COBOL, you can write in RPG, you can write in C++, and it all gets compiled to this, intermediate language. So all of these languages can run and talk to each other in the same, backend, which is kind of cool. It's been like that since the AS400. Well, not since the AS400 days, but ILE has been around for a very, very long time.
When you say they can talk to each other, can they share variable values and things like that?
Yes, yeah. So I could write a COBOL program, and somebody else could write a C program, and they can easily talk to each other because they all run at the same intermediate level before it touches the hardware, which is really cool.
Is that is that the appeal of the sort of AS400 IBM I, the mainframe? Is that right there? Like, what is the appeal? How did that become so ubiquitous in powering virtually everything around us, whether we know it or not?
There's a few reasons. I think that probably could be one. And obviously I can't speak for everybody, but in my opinion, not only is it the integrated languages, but it's also the database. The operating system is a database effectively. So it ships with a version of DB2. It's called DB2 for I now. And it's integrated into the operating system, and it's also integrated into the languages. So every language has a compiler, and then on top of that, every language has a precompiler, an SQL precompiler. So something that we'll see probably in a little while here when I'm showing you some code is that you can write embedded statements in your COBOL, in your RPG code, and even your C code that talks to the database, which is pretty cool, but not unique to this system, but definitely is a strong point for the system, is definitely the database.
I tell you what, let's get right to it. I think Vladislav is saying what everybody else is thinking is stop talking, Burke, get to the demos. So let's go ahead and bring that up and do that.
Yeah, I love the demos. Demos are my favorite part of all of this. So this is VS Code as we know it, right? And usually I don't run a dark theme. So it's kind of new using a dark theme for me, but that's okay. So this is VS Code, and there is an extension. This is the first extension we'll see. This is the Code for IBM I extension. And this is what actually powers VS Code to talk to these different IBM I machines. You can see that I have some set up already. And for the record, if you are interested in trying and actually using an IBM I, pub400.com is probably your access to get onto a system for free. You can create a user profile, sign in, write some code, use the database, whatever you want, and it's great. I'm not using that system today because I don't have my demo stuff set up there. So I have a different system set up. Now I'm just going to go ahead and click onto it, and it will automatically start connecting. So this is using SSH to talk to my IBM I. So just like, every other operating system on the planet, it has SSH. There's a whole environment called Pace where we can run open source packages like Node.js, PHP, all of these open source languages also run on IBM I. But I'm just not talking about that today. I'm just talking about the stuff that everybody has. So by default, we get some views. We get these views, right? We get the help and support, which takes you to the documentation and stuff like that. Then we have the object browser, because there are two main file systems, really. There's the IFS browser, the integrated file system, which is more like a traditional Linux file system. And then there is the there is the QSys file system, which is where programs and source code traditionally get stored. And that's what we're going to look at today. Now, I do have to switch profile because I have a profile for company system set up. Here we go. So I have these filters, because the file system is different. We have different filters. I have one to view all of the objects in the file system in this certain library, basically a folder. And then I have one called company system sources, which will show me all of the source files in this folder, the library, on the operating system, in the operating system file system. So as I said, as in the title, you can write C, you can write COBOL, you can write RPG, you can write C++ too, but lots of people do. But I'll just show you some C code, and I'll show you it compiling. So here's Fibonacci in C. As you can see, it's, the files take a moment to load. That's because everything is on the server here. Traditionally, when you're writing code when you used to write code on the AS400 and when you write code on IBMI, development tends to happen on the server, not so much on the local machine. So that is, it's not a new thing, but for a lot of people that have never touched a mainframe or a system like this before, it can be a new concept. But I have a C program. It's pretty straightforward, and I can write code. And I think usually there's an outline. I usually have the outline view, but the window is kind of small. But I can compile it from here. I can actually compile my C code, and I could do that by running an action, and I can choose what I want it to do. So create bound C will take the source code and create the object. So that created fib.program right here. So there are two ways that I could call it. I could open the green screen up and call it from there, or I could call it from VS Code. So notice here, just the printf statements, standard stuff. I can right click, and you don't see the right click, but there's a button that says run action, and then I can click on call program. There's the command it's going to use to call the program, and it will run. It will say it's run, and then there's an output tab where I can actually see the output from the program on here. Now, this isn't traditionally how programs are run. I will show you, and I'll just do it because this is probably what everybody wants to see. I can open 5250 inside of VS Code and actually do the same stuff. So if I sign in to this system, there is your standard, 5250 green screen, interface. And if I set up so I can call this program, call fib, that was the name of the program, you can see, I can also see the standard out on the screen there as well. So we have, I can write code in VS Code and compile it on the remote system, which is great. That's, that's really, you've been able to do this before. There are ways that you can do it, but it's never been as easy as this in VS Code. It's not, actually, it's never really been possible in VS Code until about 1.5 years ago when I started working on this. So,
so just to clarify, Liam, what extension is this exactly that you're using here?
Yeah, so this is the Code for IBMI extension, completely open source. And we have plenty of contributors and 120 stars or something like that. Like, it's the biggest project I've ever worked on, which is kind of fun. But yeah, completely open source, and yeah, really, this is one of many. There's a few extensions to this because IBMI is quite large, and we don't really want to ram everything in one extension, so we've split it out into a few.
So there's a couple questions here, and I'll throw a couple of them up here. There we go. So this question is, I assume the server runs code server service within it?
No, it does not. So yes, there is the option that you can actually use SSH and have that as your remote workspace. So it doesn't work with IBMI. There are some differences in architecture, so things don't quite run the same as they would on a traditional, like a Debian or Ubuntu system. So it's not possible to do that right now. So the way that this works is it's creating a new SSH connection from your machine, and it's talking to the IBMI. It's basically a re-implementation of that, but specific to IBMI.
So someone asked, why is there a database symbol before the file names? And then
let's go look at that.
Greg had answered that and said the source code is stored in tables.
That's right.
Is that true?
That is correct. Yes, it is.
Good job, Greg.
Yes, that's very true. So, you see .file, and traditionally, when people said a file, that really meant a table. So, for example, in the company system library that I have, that's a schema. A library is basically a schema. I have a file called QC source, right? So, and I can actually query it. So, yeah, I can open the source code up in the browser, but I can actually say I can create a new statement here, change it to SQL, and do select all from cmpsys.q. Oh, you can see the content assist there. QC src, run that, and you'll see there's the output from the first member. So that's actually the content.
So it stores each line in a row. Is that what it's doing there?
Yep. Now, this is the traditional way. There's new ways of developing now, but this is how it's usually been done in the past. And people don't work with this. As you've seen, I'm writing code in a standard editor. I'm not having to worry about the database. The operating system handles all of that. I don't have to worry about that.
But in the past, I suppose, did people code directly on the AS400? Because I remember we were talking about this the other day, but Sonia, I worked, and the lady that was the senior developer there for the AS400, she had a ruler, and she would use that ruler to make interfaces, right? It wasn't a ruler. It was made specifically for this.
That's right, yeah. So let me pull up some different code here, right? Let me pull up some RPG, some standard stuff. So let me go pull up department. This is always an easy one. So here is some RPG source. Now, in my vision, RPG is probably the most used language on the operating system in most businesses. COBOL is popular, but it's not as popular as RPG on this system. If you look at mainframe is COBOL heavy, but IBMI is very RPG heavy. So I have code here, and I can edit it here, but the traditional way was using a green screen. So yeah, they would have a dumb terminal at their desk, and they would see just this, and they would, here's the files in the file system, here's the members in the file system, and I can do an option 2 to edit. As you can see, I have all the options above, or I could do a 5 and display it. So I actually, would be able to write code in here. Now, I'm not going to do that because I don't do that anymore. So yeah, I would be able to write code in here.
And that ruler, then, those are the columns. Circadian Seeker saying I still have PTSD from the 6-character variable column width in
that's right
RPG programs. But those columns, you try to line up the interface to get everything lined up.
That's right. So you can see at the top here that this is the ruler for the D spec. This is an RPG. This is a variable definition. So then that's the ruler that you would need for the column base. Now, this is old RPG. That's the old way of doing it. I'm not going to show you that anymore, but the new way of doing it is, we have a new syntactical way of writing this language now. So declare S, basically a variable, exit, that's the name, indicator is a Boolean, then the initial value star off. This is a much nicer way instead of writing it like this. Much nicer. So
gotcha.
Yes.
And as it turns out, it looks like RPG 3 goes all the way to 10. So you get an additional 4 columns.
Yep. So there is a few versions of the language, but this is another interesting part about IBMI. So people have programs and source code that was written 20 years ago. Now, this may be a blessing or a curse, however you would like to see it, but that same program still runs today.
Yeah.
And the real cool part is that the source code probably still compiles today, because all the compilers are back support everything. So
all your legacy code, you're sort of assured that it will work.
Yes. Yep.
So question about the terminal there. How does that work? Like, how are you rendering that? Is that a web view? Like, what are you doing there?
So this is a real terminal inside of VS Code. So much like, the terminals view down here, I can bring this back, for example, down here, and I can switch between my terminals. Let me fix this again. I don't often use this view, but so I can actually, it's just a regular terminal in VS Code. And the way that this works is, okay, so there is an SSH connection to the IBMI, and I'm creating a new channel. That's an SSH term. So I'm basically spawning a new process, and this is the process. And then I automatically launch something called TN5250 on the IBMI, which is basically 5250, but from a terminal. So actually, if I quit this, right, this is the operating system pace environment, where I can run Node. It's basically AIX, which is a whole other topic, doesn't matter. But from here, I'm on the IBMI, Uname is producing OS 400. That's how I know it's IBMI. That's the technical name. And I can actually say, I can just press the up arrow and pull it up, but I can use this TN5250 to launch into 5250 itself from the terminal.
Ah, okay. All right. That makes sense. And then I like to, so you can pull that down. I always forget in VS Code, you can just like drag things wherever you want them now, which is pretty cool.
I know. I love that. VS Code is excellent. It's excellent. So,
all right. Good question here. Does it have breakpoint support? Like, can you step through your Fibonacci program?
That's a good question. The answer is no. There's a few reasons why. Prior to working for IBM, I was mostly working for myself for 6 years. So I built all this while self-employed, and I just don't have time to write that kind of code, honestly. I work full time, and do open source is difficult. So it doesn't exist for that reason. But I do have good news, is that it is going to be happening in the next 2 months. So you'll be able to set breakpoints and debug COBOL, C, RPG right from VS Code on the remote server. It's going to be excellent.
So how did people debug then 20 years ago when they were on the terminals? Did they debug, or did it was just a Hail Mary?
They did debug. Yeah, I can't believe we're going to go there. But there is a debugger in 5250. So, I mean, do you want to see? I can show you if you really want to see.
Yeah, let's I think the chat would like to see the rest of the stuff you've been working on, but I was just curious of whether or not people even debug. We forget. Look, y'all, developer tools are so good these days, right? Like you almost can't go wrong, and we're so spoiled and everything's free. It didn't used to be like that at all. I'm old enough to kind of remember, although Visual Basic is about as far as I go back, but I was just curious as to whether or not you could even debug those things. But yeah. Show us what else you got, Liam.
Absolutely. So the debugger is going to be good. I'm very excited for it personally. That's really the only thing I go back to the green screen for, is to debug. But so you did notice that I was able to run a query. That's something else. As I said earlier, the operating system is a database. And so there is a separate extension called DB2 for IBMI. It's in preview. I don't have a lot of time to work on it, but this allows me to browse schemas in the database, right? So I have a schema called sample, and inside of it are a bunch of objects, and I can expand tables, for example, and see stuff inside of the schema, what tables are inside of the schema. There have been ways to do this before, but I am of the nature that I like to do everything in VS Code. Excuse me. I like to do everything in VS Code. I like to write my code and understand, data at the same time. And so I can actually, expand a table and see what columns are in it. For example, I can click this button up here, and it will run the query and show me the results.
Man, that is so nice. I want that same thing for like modern transactional, servers in VS Code. I mean, I know there's some extensions, but that's exactly what I want when I'm building apps.
Yes, I love it. And this this was one of the more recent things that I've gotten to work on. And I really like it. And it comes with all the content assists. So if I do a dot, I can see all of the columns inside of it.
Yeah, it looks just like SQL Management Studio. So does it
Yes.
support SQL? Is that SQL that you're writing?
Yeah, it's just SQL. You can, it's a SQL compliant. DB2 is, it's just another database. It is SQL compliant. It has been for years. It's and it's baked into the operating system.
I didn't know that. I thought you had to access it with, whatever syntax RPG has for.
So yeah, of course, those languages do have their own ways of accessing the database. They do, and they've been around prior to DB2, really, and SQL really being a thing. But in modern, when you're writing modern RPG and modern COBOL, as I said earlier, there is ways that you can embed SQL statements in the code. So, I can declare a cursor, and this cursor is just doing a select, and then I open the cursor and I can say, fetch from the cursor into this struct, into these struct members. I can actually run a query and put the columns from the fetch, into variables. So you can write SQL inside of your COBOL, inside of your.
It reminds me of like, what's the name for things like link to SQL, or that's not what it's called. It's called it's not link to SQL, Entity Framework. What are those things called? Where like you can like, I'm talking about where in C# you chat, help me out.
Oh, like LinQ. You on about that?
Yeah, like link. There's a name for those though, where it's like, but basically, in my mind at least, I know it's like making SQL like strings somewhere, but it's the same kind of thing, right? Like we've come full circle where we started off like you could query directly from the language and drop it in a variable, and now we've come full circle to you can query directly from the language and drop it in a variable.
Yep, it's very, very cool. So, and here's an example in COBOL. So I have this is a program, and it has an input struct that you pass in an employee number in, and it returns the full name, and I'm moving blank. So I'm setting full name to blank, and then I'm saying if there's an emp no and it's not blank, then run a query. Select the first name and the last name into this variable from the employee table, and I'm actually able to integrate this SQL logic, which is really common these days. People have a lot of people that are running IBMI now put a lot of business logic into, SQL procedures and functions, because it's a good way that it can be reused. So I can have my RPG program or my Node.js web service use the same database logic now. Like that's kind of where it's going. It's really
so you cool. Can you run your Node apps on an IBM I?
Absolutely, you can. Absolutely. So that's a great question, and of course you could. This is where the IFS browser comes in, because it's just like it's more like a traditional Linux file system, and I can actually navigate through it. So I have my home directory here. I have a repositories folder. I have stuff inside of it. Standard file browser. So for example, I'm working on, this is an example repository that I use, and it has, RPG, but in a different file system, basically. But what I could do is I could make a new directory here. You didn't see that part, and by the way, this isn't using a workspace, and we'll talk about why that is in a moment. So let's just call this node demo, for example. So I could put, I have a node demo file, and I'm going to create a new stream file in there called, standard index.js, and I'll just do console.log, hello from IBMI, save it, and then I can open up a terminal. I can say I want a paste terminal. That's the subsystem where it runs these programs, and I can say cd into builds, and then node demo. And notice I'm just using bash. It's pretty standard, same as any other operating system at this point. And then I can, I have node. I actually have node 18, I think, is on this box. Oh, okay. Node 16 is fine. So now I can say node index, and it will run just as you expected. This system is not one that I use, so it's kind of slow. But so I can run node, and people do run node. There is tons of Node.js in production running on IBMI prior to working for it.
Yeah, I did not know that. If I've learned anything, it's that you can run just about anything on an IBM I. How much is can I get one of those? Like, can you just send me one. Just send me an IBM. How much does this go for? Maybe $100.
That's a good question. I'd be honest, I've never bought one, so I don't know.
They were huge, you know, back when we had the AS400 in our data center. It was an enormous box. Do they still look like that, or what do we look like now?
They're just traditional They're just traditional like servers now. Like they just fit in a rack, and you can run, you know, Alpar's virtual machines on them, just like a normal. You can fit it, and it runs in any data center type, you know, standard server type material.
Awesome.
Now,
I have another question. Can you get an IBM I in Azure or AWS or any of these other cloud providers?
So there are partners that can actually run IBM I in the cloud, so that it is possible in Azure, but you have to go through. I think you can actually install it in Azure, and then it gets set up for you automatically now. So, but I haven't done that. I can't speak for it. I know it's possible, or at least people claim that it's possible. So that's cool. IBM Cloud is another popular thing where people are running hybrid cloud, where you have some on-prem, some in the cloud, some kind of virtual network to connect the two. That's very common in the IBM Cloud. And then in Google Cloud, you can run it as well. You can run Power Servers and IBM I in Google Cloud too. So it's possible.
All right. So Glenn, yes, object relational mapper was what I was trying to think of and could not. And apparently a used AS400 is somewhere between $400 and $2,000. Really not that bad. I would have thought it was a whole lot more it's a lot of machine.
You can find them on eBay. It's pretty common. And in fact, there's a good hobbyist group that I'm part of where they talk about maintaining their AS400 at home. So that stuff does exist.
All right. Well, what else, Liam? What else have we got? Is there anything else that you wanted to show us in terms of these great extensions?
Yeah, maybe I could show you code coverage.
Okay.
So code coverage is really popular in TypeScript. You know, it goes really well with unit testing. And something that I love to show off is that IBM I has a built-in coverage runner, so you can just compile a program and run code coverage on top of it, and it will just work, which is really cool. So I'm going to write a very small program quickly. Here is a very small program, but what I'm going to do is just do something else. I'm going to say, you know, my number, and I'll just make it an int 10. I'll just say my number equals 5, and then I'll say if my number is 5, and inside of that, I'll say thingy equals, you know, it is 5, whatever. Else thingy equals not 5, right? Very basic. And what I'll do is I will compile it. And you can see the linter is complaining. There's a linter as well. Believe it or not, RPG has a linter now.
Did you build that too?
I did, yeah.
Literally, so responsible. Well, I'm sure you have contributors to these extensions as well.
Yeah, we do. It's not just me, I promise. So anyway, so I've created this program, and now it exists on the system, right? So if I pull open 5250 again, I don't have one open, so I'll just use this one, and I'll bring it up here, right? And let me close this, and I'll get rid of that for a second. And so I'll sign in. I don't know what library I created it in. I think it was this. And then I can say call test. That's the test program. And you didn't see anything. You might have seen a flicker, but you can see it says hello issue. And that's the text that I told it to display, right? Very basic. But what I can do is run code coverage over this, and I can do it through VS Code. So I don't even need this anymore. What I can do is make sure I have the extension installed. So I can go and enable it. Code coverage, enable. That adds a new view. It's kind of cool. I already have one set up, but we ain't going to use that. So let's come back over to IBM I, right click and say, oh, you can't see it, but it says create new test coverage. And it loads up this UI where you could enter in the information for the test. So you can give it a name, what command it's going to run, what program the coverage was really focusing on. You click save, come over to here, run this. fingers crossed it works. I didn't think about showing you this today, but it's running right now. And then when it's done running, you see a result. And usually if you have a program that calls many programs or calls a different library, you see all of the results show up, but it's just one. But I can click on it and it's actually showing me line by line what lines were executed and what weren't inside of VS Code. I love that. I love it. It's code coverage has never been so easy.
Yeah, why is that important, Liam? Why is code coverage a big deal?
I personally think it's a big deal because in the space of writing COBOL, unit testing isn't a very popular thing. There's a lot of end-to-end tests, but I think that code coverage personally is a good way to find out code that's not used. So if you have 10 COBOL programs that all work with each other, and it turns out that 20% of it's not even used but being maintained, code coverage is really good at finding out that kind of information. And it's also really good to pair it with unit tests too, but that's something I would like to see pair too. But it's really cool. I love it.
Yeah, so just a great way to get rid of, I didn't say dead code, but just code paths that are never going to be executed and are just hanging out, accruing technical debt for you.
I love it. Code coverage is, and this was really fun to build too. Like I had to learn all of the backend APIs for it to work, and on the IBMI side, I had to learn stuff about VS Code. I mean, so it's built around decorations, and oh yeah, man, it's cool. And the really cool part is, maybe I'll show you one other thing, right? So let me go and open the test file up again. Okay, so here's my test file, and I know this is going to be hard to see because here's the test, and I'm going to bring it down here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change the number from 5 to 4, and I'm going to recompile it. Okay, so it's compiled. Now if I hit the refresh button, it's going to rerun all of the open tests. But then the code coverage updates on its own. And it's so cool. I love it. I love it. I love that. Really, all right. It does open a new tab, but it will, if the tab is open and it's changed, it will tell you. And I love that about it.
So here's sort of a philosophical question, Liam. At what percentage of code coverage is it okay to publish your code?
That's a great question. That's not a question for me to answer. I would at least say 90 is a good number, at least.
90%. All right.
Yeah. No, let's just go with that. I don't know. Yeah. Let's just go with that. I just make it possible. I don't make decisions.
Oh yeah. Can you imagine running code? Was there always code coverage in the ES400?
I don't think so. I think it came around about 7 or 8 years ago. At least built into the operating system. So code coverage actually is part, you can install it. It's part of the base now, which is cool. I didn't have to go and install any other tools. Don't need to, don't need any of that. It just works.
We're just there. Yeah, Glenn pointed out that using code coverage with source control is a great way to see if all your changed lines are covered by tests. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, that's true. That's where it would be super valuable. It's not in the code that you've been running, but in the code you just wrote, what you just added.
Yep.
Very good point, Glenn. All right, Liam. Anything else you want to show us today on using VS Code to do literally anything at all?
Let me see. There's a lot of choice. I have a lot of choice. I'll show you the notebooks because that's the other cool VS Code thing that I love. Okay. So everybody, knows that, well, hopefully everybody knows that VS Code has an excellent notebook API. And so I can run this command. It says create new IBMI notebook. Oh, do I have installed?
No way. You made IBMI notebooks?
Let me see. There we go. So
gosh, you did.
So there are two things that you can do. You can run SQL statements or you can run system commands. So for example, I can run, if I want to, let's do this first. Let's put in some text. Let's get rid of this. First, show me the data from, a table. Okay. plus the code, and then I'll write the statement. Select all from sample.employee. I don't even need that. Execute. Okay. So yeah, I can run the query and get the results. But then you can also run system commands. Okay, so I can do code and I can change this to CL, control language is what that stands for. And maybe I want a new markdown here to describe what this is. So I want to, if I can get the thing to move, I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to say, show me system info about the employee table or employee file. You know, that's the old name for it. So
you should be able to drag it above from the left-hand side, Liam.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thanks. So I have it as CL, and then I can run system commands. So I can say disp ffd, and notice here, I'm able to prompt on system commands. So this is IBMI system commands. Anyway, I can say file, and then I can say sample/employee, and I can hit run, and it's going to show me the output from the system command in line. And I love that. This is an excellent way to create documentation and share it with your teammates. I think this is excellent, personally.
That is incredible. So can you use the variable explorer? Does that work here in your notebooks?
No, I don't think it does. I don't think it does. Okay. I haven't done that much to it. I got this working and I was like, oh, this is cool. I'm just going to put it out and leave it. And I do use this all the time, actually. So, but I love the notebooks. It's really, I think it's excellent, personally.
So Matt says he hasn't even touched Git. Yeah, but is Git's not a thing, right? For aren't you on the server? Like, isn't that the point that you're already there?
Yeah, but it is a thing. It is a thing. Oh, it is. Okay. It is. The big push this year is using Git with all of your RPG, all of your COBOL. It's doable. People have been doing it for a long time, and they're just kind of quiet about it. But, you know, I actually have open, let's do open folder. No, not open folder. I want to do open recent. No. Sorry, I did it again. Open recent company system. This is an example that I use all the time. So here is a workspace, and I have code on my local machine. Okay, pretty standard stuff. Here is a thing, and I have this file called actions.json, and this is how I can tell my project or certain files to get built. It's kind of like tasks. It's kind of like the tasks file, but specific to IBMI, basically. And I can say, I need to connect to a system first off. So I'll go back and connect to the system that I want to build on. So again, this is local. So now I can say, you know, I can say this, and the change is in Git. You know, it's standard RPG development, but now it's in Git. And now I'm connected to my system. I can do this. I can say Control E to run the build. It's going to show me the actions. And what it does is it will upload and compile the code, or at least attempt to. And so now we can do that, you know, and people are doing this.
So wait a minute, you put it in Git on the same server or in a distributed Git somewhere else?
So that's a good question. So many years ago, it was very popular to keep all of the source code on the server, right? On the IBMI. And it included Git. It's like, oh, this is our code. I don't want to put it on GitHub. I don't want it private on GitHub. I don't want it anywhere but my IBMI. But now people are really opening up to, you know, running GitHub Enterprise and GitLab on-prem. That's very popular now. So they would store their RPG and their COBOL on-prem somewhere, usually, and then they would either clone it and build it on the IBMI, like as part of a CI process, or and when developing, they would clone it to their local machine, and they can write and compile on the server. So, yeah,
that's incredible. Wow. Well, Liam, you got a lot of fans. Susan said she could watch this all day. This is great. I mean, it's incredible because I had no idea until yesterday that any of this actually existed. Or that folks that are doing this type of development have essentially the same developer tools that I have as like a JavaScript dev or a Python dev. I mean, that's just incredible. That's incredible.
That's exactly what I'm going for, because in my opinion, VS Code is very accessible, and we'll come to that in a minute. It's very accessible, and I like good developer tools, and I really want the best
it makes
stuff.
all the difference in the world. I mean, that's the thing that makes your life livable as a developer is your developer tools.
Yeah, I love it. It's great. And working on it is just as fun, for the record. I love building this stuff. I love maintaining it. It's excellent. It's so fun.
So Brian asked a question that I do want to bring up, although someone answered it, which is that, is SSH the only way to connect? Because my company doesn't want to keep that port open. So we hear this from time to time, right? Even with the remote SSH stuff, is that people are oftentimes in highly secure SSH environments or no SSH environment at all, right? What are your thoughts on that?
So I prefer this. So the other tools that you can use to, work on code require a lot more setup, a lot more open ports, and usually most of the time aren't secure. What I like about SSH being the only thing that you need is that, one, if you do it correctly, let me show you. I can disconnect from the system, right? It's going to reload. When you create a new connection, you can choose an SSH key. You can actually provide the key to that server. If you do it correctly, it's secure. And I'll leave it at that. That's really all I have to say is, it's as secure as you want to make it.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
All right. So SSH, not intrinsically bad, y'all. You can lock it down, but I guess you would have to convince some IT person somewhere that this is a safe thing to do.
Maybe this doesn't apply to the person that asked, but I have met plenty. I used to have plenty of clients that would say no to SSH, but yes to FTP.
Which, yeah. Well, then, I mean, it's just a mindset thing, right? It's just
it is, like, yes.
In your mind, well, you only use FTP to move files. You use SSH to execute commands remotely. Actually, you can do both.
Yep. And I love
All right. Chat, any more questions for Liam? Liam, anything else you want to show us here?
Oh, that's a big question.
We're getting towards, we're pushing the
I know.
But I feel like everything you show us is cooler than the previous thing you just showed us.
Yeah, I will. I'm going to enable this quickly, right? So this is not my extension, but I have contributed to it. And so this is a cool little thing. So if you have, this is specific to RPG, but if you have, let me find some. Maybe I have some old stuff somewhere. Maybe it's in here. No, it's not this one. But if you have old RPG like this, you can actually right click and convert to free format. I know you can't see that, and then it will do that. That's kind of cool. That's a really cool extension. And, we're pushing hard for people to use good, clean RPG that's readable and, so that's a nice one.
Yeah, you need to get that added to the prettier spec. And now prettier.
Right. All right. Yeah.
JavaScript, CSS, and RPG.
Yep. You know that. So, yeah, I guess I haven't even spoken about the linter or anything like that for it yet. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. We've done
There's so much more. Well, do you want to pull up? So can you pull up your extension? I don't know if you have your contributors listed, Liam. If you do, we might want to just take a moment to pull those folks up, just because this stuff is so great and it's all community contributed, and that's just incredible. I mean, it really is.
So what I will show you is there's a link to it because it's part of the documentation. So maybe if I share that, I could open Chrome and share that with you. I'd love to do that.
Sure. And while you figure that out, folks, for those of you that are doing this sort of dev, check that out, the IBM Series I stuff. It looks like the Halcyon Tech is the publisher. I assume that was your company prior to joining IBM.
That's right. So originally it was supposed to be a paid product. And I was like, yeah, that's not happening. We're going to make it all open source. and now it's free. So just that's the way that I like to do it. So that's the way we did it.
Well, I'm sure people really appreciate this. So here's our contributors. Just crank the font size up a little bit.
Oh yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks to all these folks who contributed to this amazing work. This is awesome.
Seriously.
Producer, can we throw up the link to the extension one more time? I think we had something. There we go. That's what you need right there for everything you need for your IBM. Is it IBM I, IBM Series I? Am I saying that correct?
IBM I, just IBM I. So yeah. And then people sometimes say the I, like, oh, I'm going to go write code on the I or something. I've heard that.
They just call it DI.
People have said that. People say that. So,
all right, folks. Well, Liam, thank you so much, not just for what you've done in terms of contributions, but for coming on here, for sharing it with us. Do you have a YouTube channel? Like, should people follow you? Like, what if people just want to hang out with Liam? What should they do?
I do have a YouTube channel and it has tutorials on using code for IBM I, but that's really it. I mean, Twitter is probably the best place to reach me, and it's in my name, Notes of Barry. So
should we go into that? Why your Twitter username is what it is? Because mine's just Burke Holland.
Yeah, my nickname is Barry. People tend to call me Barry. So
is that like a nickname for Liam?
No, it's just a nickname.
Okay.
I've had it for 10 years or something, but my Twitter is Notes of Barry. My Instagram is Pics of Barry, you know. So
tweets of Barry. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, chat, so much for being here. Thank you, Liam. This is great. Check out Liam's extension. Get that installed. Modernizing developer tools for everybody. That's awesome. Thanks, chat. We'll see you next week. Talk to you soon. Have a great day and a great weekend. Bye.